What other nation on earth is like your people Israel? What other nation, O God, have you redeemed from slavery to be your own people? King David prayed to the Lord in 1 Chronicles 17-21. To Abraham it was the land of Canaan, because the Canaanites lived there. But to Abraham's descendants it became the land of promise, also referred to as Palestine. The name is derived from a people known as the Philistines. Eventually, the Holy Land became known as the Land of Israel, which is named after Abraham's grandson Jacob, whom God renamed Israel. When Jacob dreamed a dream and saw angels ascending and descending a stairway that stretched to heaven, God spoke to Jacob in the dream, renewing his promise. I am giving this land to you and your descendants. When Jacob awakened from his dream, he marveled. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. For the Lord has chosen Jacob for himself, Israel for his own special treasure. Moses told his brother-in-law Hobab, Come with us, for the Lord has promised wonderful blessings for Israel. For more than 700 years, Israel existed as nothing but a promise from God. Israel finally became a nation and then lived on independently under a succession of Jewish rulers for nearly 800 years. Israel then went into a period of limbo for more than 2,500 years, during which several world powers dominated the land. The only nation in the world to come back after being considered dead, Israel was reborn as a sovereign Jewish state in 1948. Since its resurrection, Israel has built a democratic form of government. God's blessing to Israel also carried a responsibility for the people of Israel to make him known to the rest of the world. The remains of the ancient Mamre near Hebron are known today by the modern Arabic name Ramat el-Khalil. This oak of Mamre is said to mark the spot where Abraham pitched his tent before his encounter with the angels. The tree is said to be 5,000 years old. Here is where Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent when he was assured that Sarah would give birth to a son. This good news came from 3 strangers to whom Abraham served a meal when they appeared mysteriously at his door. Sarah could not believe what they told Abraham. Long after Abraham's time, a pagan shrine was built at the site of Mamre. The shrine was eventually torn down and replaced with a church that is still visible today. The Dome of the Rock, which has existed for centuries, has always impressed those visiting Jerusalem. Christian and Jewish pilgrims are disappointed that the most prominent building in the Old City is a Muslim shrine. However, the presence of this building is yet another example of the convoluted history of Jerusalem. In AD 600s, when the Muslims became a strong force in the Holy Land, they took over the site. In 691, they built the Dome of the Rock over a huge outcropping of rock reputed to be the site of Mount Moriah, where Abraham prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac. The Jewish people believe that Solomon later built the temple on this very site. When the Muslims took over the site, they destroyed the temple and showed their conviction by building this shrine where the temple had once stood. The Muslims also believe the rock inside the Dome of the Rock has a direct link to their major prophet, the messenger Muhammad. From this rock, they believe that the prophet ascended into heaven for an encounter with Allah, their one and only true God. They cite another depression in the rock surface as being a footprint left by Muhammad. Modern Hebron, one of the oldest, continually inhabited cities in the world, is predominantly a Muslim city inhabited by more than 150,000 Muslims and only a few Jewish families. Excavations have provided evidence of settlement and buildings constructed before the pyramids were built in Egypt. Hebron is also associated with many important events in the Bible, including the following. Here, all of the tribal leaders met and proclaimed David as king of all Israel. David made Hebron as his capital city for the first 7.5 years of his reign. From Hebron, Absalom plotted his rebellion against King David, his father. Caleb received Hebron as part of his share of the land of Canaan. As a city, Hebron existed approximately 1,000 years before Abraham lived here, Machpelah, circa 2000 BC. When inside the wall and the mosque, the tombs of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, as well as Jacob's son Joseph can be seen. The Bible tells us that Joseph was buried in Shechem after he died in Egypt. However, according to Muslim tradition, Joseph's bones were later removed from the original burial place and placed in the cave at Machpelah. Visitors will see the tomb of Joseph, son of Jacob, in Shechem when visiting Nablus. When Sarah died, Abraham, who was a foreigner in the land and owned no land, faced the problem of where to bury his wife. With the assistance of the city officials, he decided to buy a certain plot of land owned by a local man named Ephron. The plot of land Abraham bought, which was called Machpelah, contained a cave in which Abraham buried Sarah. When Abraham died, he was also buried there. In later years, 4 other members of his family were laid to rest in the same cave, including Abraham's son Isaac and Isaac's wife Rebekah, Abraham's grandson Jacob and his wife Leah. Entrance to the actual cave is forbidden and kept locked. The spot above the cave is enshrined by a Muslim mosque. Rachel's tomb is the 3rd holiest site for the Jews after the Temple Mountain in Jerusalem and the Cave of Patriarchs in Hebron. The site is very close to the checkpoint from the Palestinian territories into Israel. The original tomb, a rectangular structure with a white dome, has been enclosed inside a fortress, complete with a guard tower, soldiers, and barbed wire. Due to deteriorating political and security situations, the original domed structure was fortified and enclosed inside a building with a hall from the entrance. This site is believed to be the burial place of the biblical matriarch Rachel, the wife of Jacob and mother of 2 of his 12 sons. She died giving birth to Benjamin, and Jacob set a pillar upon her grave. The structure on the site, a cube topped by a dome, was built around 1620 by the Ottoman Turks. The site consists of a rock with 11 stones upon it, 1 for each of the 11 sons of Jacob who were alive when Rachel died in childbirth. This tomb has become an important place of Jewish pilgrimage, especially Jewish women unable to give birth. Jewish tradition has it that Rachel weeps for her children, and when the Jews were taken into exile, she wept as they passed by her grave on the way to Babylon. Over the centuries, the rock was covered by a dome supported by 4 arches. The structure was enlarged in 1860 by Sir Moses Montefiore. The large tomb is now covered by a white drape. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran to journey toward the land of Canaan. He took his wife Sarah with him, his nephew Lot, and all of his wealth, his livestock, and all of the people he had taken into his household at Haran. Upon arriving in Canaan, he traveled as far as Shechem, where he established a camp beside the oak of Moriah. Then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, "Unto thy seed will I give this land." And there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. This camp became the first shrine for worship of the Lord erected in the land God had promised to Abraham and his descendants. Over time, his campsite grew into a village, then a town, and finally a city. Abraham's grandson Jacob also built an altar here, but by then Shechem was already described as a town. Later, Joshua gave his farewell address to the tribes of Israel in this place. Shechem was probably one of the Canaanite cities Joshua captured. King Jeroboam I turned Shechem into the capital city of the northern kingdom when the united kingdom of David and Solomon split into two kingdoms, the southern and the northern. The Samaritans are the offspring of marriages between Jews and Gentiles. Full-blooded Jews despised the Samaritans and refused to associate with them because of their impure racial heritage. During the ministry of the prophet Hosea in the 8th century BC, Shechem apparently served as a worship center. However, the facts are not clear as to whether or not the people worshiped the Lord or false gods. Shechem is located in a narrow valley between the twin peaks of Mount Gerizim and Mount Abel. However, Samaria eventually became the permanent political capital of the northern kingdom, while Shechem continued to be a religious center. Shechem is still home to the remnant of the ancient Samaritans who live on nearby Mount Gerizim, the original site of their temple that was destroyed. The temple and the city at Mount Gerizim were destroyed by John Hyrcanus I at the end of the 2nd century BC, a destruction that had a devastating impact upon the Samaritans. The history of Samaritans during the 7th and 6th centuries BC is shrouded in uncertainty. Only during the time of the return to Zion from the Babylonian exile at the end of the 5th century BC did Sanballat, the governor of Samaria, construct a temple on Mount Gerizim. A large city grew around this temple, and the city flourished during the Hellenistic period. This city was the spiritual, religious, and administrative center of the Samaritan people, and unified the Samaritans and the diaspora. The name of Mount Gerizim occurs in the Torah from the beginning of the Israelite experience in the land of Canaan. In the Torah, the children of Israel are commanded to conduct the ceremony of blessing and cursing upon Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Mount Gerizim is once again mentioned in Judges 9:7. When the Lord thy God hath brought thee in unto the land whither thou goest to possess it, that thou shalt put the blessing upon Mount Gerizim and the curse upon Mount Ebal. Nearby is the village of Sychar, where Jesus talked with a Samaritan woman at the well of Jacob. There is very little doubt that the Jacob's well that tourists visit today is the same well where Jesus talked with the Samaritan woman. Throughout the centuries, numerous churches were built on the site to commemorate this important event in his ministry. Most scholars are convinced that the Sychar mentioned in the account from John's Gospel was on the site the Arab village of Ascar now occupies. This identification is based on Ascar's location, about a 10-minute walk from Jacob's well, the site where Jesus' conversation with the Samaritan woman took place. The 135 feet deep well is located within the complex of the Bereka Monastery, which is owned by the Eastern Orthodox Church. Although Jacob's well is not mentioned in the Old Testament, what is recorded in the Old Testament is that Jacob bought some property near Shechem after returning to Canaan from living with his uncle Laban. The region around modern Ascar and Shechem is noted for numerous springs, but Jacob probably dug this well on his own land to ensure an undisputed water supply for his family and his large herds of cattle and sheep. Another famous landmark located here is the tomb of Joseph. His bones were eventually brought from Egypt and buried on the property his father Jacob had bought many years before Joseph's death in Egypt. Most visitors to Mount Sinai come for the spiritual experience of feeling God's presence on top of the mountain. Monks of St. Catherine have made this experience possible by carving more than 3,000 steps in the solid rock all the way to the summit. Many tourists begin their journey to the summit in the early morning hours in order to capture the spectacular sunrise over the countryside. On the Mount of Sinai sits the monastery of St. Catherine, home to the monks of the Greek Orthodox Church. Built in AD 500, St. Catherine is definitely one of the oldest, continually operating monasteries in the world. Nearby is a spring known as Moses' Well, which provides water for the monks. On Mount Sinai, during the Exodus, God delivered to Moses the 10 Commandments and revealed his glory to the Israelites at Sinai. At Sinai, which is also called Horeb, God called Moses through the burning bush to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. This monastery, which memorializes the life and ministry of Moses, claims to stand on the site of the burning bush where Moses talked with the Lord. Mount Nebo rises to a height of about 2,700 feet in southern Jordan. For over 1,600 years, Christians and Jews have agreed this site is where Moses died. When the 120-year-old Moses died, the Bible says his eyesight was clear and he was as strong as ever. If he were in such good physical health, why and how did he die? The only logical answer is that his task of leading the Israelites was finished. Since God would not allow him to enter the promised land, the time had come for him to step aside, allowing his successor, Joshua, to take over. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, and the Lord buried him in a valley, Beth-peor, in the land of Moab. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre until this day. For sure, Moses' burial place is somewhere in this area. Yet another beautiful and interesting attraction on Mount Nebo is a group of springs known as the Spring of Moses. Located about 1,100 feet from the summit of the Mount Nebo, these springs flow down the mountainside and form a small stream that finally empties into the Jordan River. Some biblical professors who have visited the area are of the opinion that Moses and the Israelites most likely drank from these springs. Perhaps Moses quenched his thirst at these springs for the last time before his mysterious death. Excavations have provided evidence that the church was built on this mountain as early as AD 394. On the same site today stands a modern church known as the Memorial Church of Moses and serves as an active monastery of the Catholic Franciscan order. From the top of Mount Nebo, pilgrims of today can enjoy the same panorama the Lord granted Moses before he died. Also on the same platform is a snake-like sculpture in the form of a cross that represents the pole Moses held up in the wilderness to cure the snake bites that God had inflicted upon the Israelites as a result of their disobedience. God instructed Moses to make a serpent of brass and attach it to a pole that the people could look upon and live. Underneath the sculpture are the same words of Jesus to Nicodemus. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. According to Muslim tradition, the tombs of Joshua, Caleb, and Joshua's father Nun are located here. The Palestinian Authority controls this Muslim town, so Jews and Christians are allowed to visit these tombs only at prescribed times and with special permission. Today, this town is identified with the Arab village of Kefel Harris. Joshua took over from Moses when he died, brought the people into Canaan, and led them in their military campaigns to vanquish the land. He left a legacy of courageous leadership for future generations. Joshua received on-the-job training from Moses for his future leadership. Moses sent Joshua with others into Canaan on a fact-finding mission. After leading the Israelites to conquer Canaan, Joshua divided the land among the 12 tribes. Joshua received the city of Timnath-Serah in the mountains as a reward for his faithful leadership of the tribes of Israel. No leader was ever more deserving of such an inheritance. When Joshua died at the age of 110 years, he was buried at Timnath-Serah. At the end of his life, Joshua challenged the people to remain faithful to God, and he led them to renew their covenant with the Lord. Along with Caleb, he recommended that the Israelites overcome their fear, trust the Lord, and take the land. Because of his faith and courage, he and Caleb survived the wilderness wandering years and were allowed to enter the Promised Land. The Hebrew Bible traditionally considered Zechariah the author of the book of Zechariah, the 11th of the 12 minor prophets. He was one of the most significant Jewish prophets of the late 6th century BC. Zechariah prophesied the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem by the Jews who had returned from exile in Babylon. Zechariah talks continually about God's love for his people and his land of Israel. In Zechariah 1:3, God pleads to Israel, "Turn ye unto me, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will turn unto you." Zechariah had 8 visions. 1. The man among the myrtle trees. 2. The 4 horns and the 4 craftsmen. 3. The surveyor with a measuring line. 4. The cleansing and crowning of Joshua, the high priest. Chapter 3. 5. The gold lampstand and the 2 olive trees. Chapter 4. 6. The flying scroll. 7. The woman in a basket. 8. The 4 chariots. God's message to restore Israel and the nations to their right relationship with one another and to Him as the God of the world can be seen in all of these visions. Haggai was a Hebrew prophet during the building of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, the author of the book of Haggai, and one of the 12 minor prophets in the Hebrew Bible. Haggai, along with the prophet Zechariah, encouraged the returned exiles to rebuild the temple. Haggai's messages are among the most carefully and precisely dated in the entire Old Testament. Haggai supported the officials of his time, especially Zerubbabel the governor and Joshua the high priest. Malachi was one of the last 3 prophets to be included in the era of the prophets, the other 2 being Haggai and Zechariah. Malachi 3:1 predicts the coming of John the Baptist, my messenger, and Jesus Christ, the messenger of the covenant. Isaiah had also foretold the coming of someone who would announce the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Malachi 3:1 states, "Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me, and the Lord, whom ye seek, shall suddenly come." The Judean desert stretches north from the Negev along the western side of the Dead Sea to just north of Jericho, an extremely dry and isolated area noted for its scorching heat. This strip of land is also known as the Wilderness of Judah. This is probably the desolate area to which Jesus withdrew when Satan tempted him at the beginning of his public ministry. During the Byzantine period, the 4th through the 7th century AD, the hermits found the Judean desert a place of choice for seclusion in the Holy Land. Although this desert is close to the holy city of Jerusalem, it is also remote and barely inhabited. Many of these monks initially were pilgrims who toured the holy sites and were overwhelmed by their spiritual experience. Their religious passion drove them to a deeper devotion to God. The number of hermits grew from only a few monks to 10,000 or more who lived in the monasteries built in the desert. Solitude is the word that comes to mind when seeing these monasteries in the remote deserts of Judea and elsewhere. Greek Orthodox monks built it into the side of a high mountain so they could live a quiet life of prayer and contemplation. In Orthodox Christianity and certain other Eastern Christian communities, a lavra or a lora is a type of monastery consisting of a cluster of cells or caves for hermits with church and sometimes a refectory, a room for communal meals, at the center. The Lavrite style of living has its origins in the early 4th century. The Greek term lavra was employed from the 5th century on specifically for the semi-eremitical monastic settlements of the Judean desert where loras were very numerous. Founded in AD 484, the Mar Saba monastery in the Kidron Valley is one of the oldest, still inhabited monasteries in the world. The Lavra of St. Sabas, the Sanctified, known as Mar Saba, is one of the most ancient and almost continuously functioning monasteries in the world. When St. Sabas was only 8 years old and still living in his homeland of Cappadocia in Asia Minor, he became a monk. At the age of 18, he left for the Holy Land and devoted himself totally in obedience to St. Euthymius the Great. He settled in a cave in this valley in AD 478 as the result of an order received from an angel. After living alone for 5 years, he began accepting monks to establish with his monastic brotherhood. When the first small cave church, the church built by God, dedicated to St. Nicholas, became too small for the community, St. Sabas built a larger church in honor of the Annunciation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. St. Sabas and St. Theodosius were, as is well known, guides for all monks towards the kingdom of heaven. St. Sabas became famous throughout the whole world for his holiness. He died in 532, and a few years after his death, his body was found unchanged and intact. The Crusaders took away his body to the west. In 1964, St. Sabas appeared in a vision to some Roman Catholics and ordered them to return his remains to the Lavra of St. Sabas. Thus, his holy body was returned in 1965. St. Sabas led an ascetic way of life, achieved perfection equal to the angels. Between the death of St. Sabas and the destruction of the Holy Land by the Persians in 614 and by Arabs in 638, monasticism in the wilderness of Judea and in Lavra flourished fully. 5,000 monks in the Lavra of St. Sabas and the entire wilderness from the Dead Sea to Bethlehem and from Jericho to Hebron was inhabited by 15,000 monks with 70 monasteries. Many of the known and unknown saints from the Lavra of St. Sabas who accepted martyrdom at the hands of Persians and Arab bandits can be singled out. Just imagine, the Lavra of St. Sabas was attacked by enemies 14 times. The Sabite monks were always defenders of the faith, not only in the Holy Land, but even beyond its borders. One of the oldest monasteries in the Palestinian desert and all over the world is the Holy Monastery, which was built in the year 455 by Abbot Gerasimos. The monastery is roughly a mile away from the Jordan River and built in the form of a lavra. St. Gerasimos was born in Myra of Lycia and, as a great spiritual torch of the desert, went to sleep in Christ in 475. Situated quite close to the lavra was another convent called the Cain Monastery. Many are of the opinion that it was situated in the same place as today's Lavra of St. Gerasimos, and it was built when St. Helena visited the Holy Land in the year 326. The place was originally a cave, and in accordance to tradition, The Holy Family was invited to stay and rest there while on their way to Egypt to escape from King Herod. During the Arab conquest, both of the monasteries were reduced to ruins. However, from the beginning of the last century, the monasteries began to grow and flourish once again. This monastery was founded in the 5th century, around AD 480, by John of Thebes, an Egyptian who assembled a group of 5 Syrian hermits who had settled around a cave where they believed the prophet Elijah was fed by ravens. This monastery became an important spiritual center in the 6th century under the name of St. George of Chasuba, who came from Cyprus as a teenager after his parents had died, to follow the ascetic life in the Holy Land. When the Persians swept through the valley in AD 614, the invaders destroyed the monastery and massacred the 14 monks who dwelt there. The bones and skulls of the martyred monks can still be seen today in the monastery chapel. The Crusaders made some attempts for restoration in 1179. However, the monastery was again abandoned when the monks were expelled. In 1878, a Greek monk named Kallinikos settled here and restored the monastery, finishing it in 1901. In 2010, a newly built road improved access, but visitors must still descend a steep and winding path for about 15 minutes to reach the monastery, which is one of 5 monasteries still functioning in the Judean desert. At the western edge of Mount Carmel in the North Point is Stella Maris Church and Monastery, the world headquarters of the Carmelites, a Catholic religious order. Opposite the monastery, a footpath leading down towards the Mediterranean leads to another grotto called Elijah's Cave, where he meditated before his encounter with the priests of Baal. It is also believed to be where Elijah established a school of prophets. Built between 1827 and 1836, the current monastery and church of Stella Maris stand right above a cave that recalls the presence of the prophet Elijah. According to the Christian tradition, the prophet Elijah occasionally lived in this cave, as people on Mount Carmel have lived in caves since prehistoric times. Behind the altar in a niche is the statue of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and below is the cave in which Elijah lived. This space is roughly 3 by 5 meters, separated from the cave of the church by 2 porphyry pillars and some steps. As well as having Stella Maris on the North Point, the Carmelite order has another church on the southern tip of Mount Carmel at El Maraca, which is known as the Church of the Sacrifice of Elijah. This church commemorates the episode of Elijah's challenges against the prophets of Baal. Here, the prophet Elijah pitted the pagan god Baal against the true God to show which was superior. The false prophets of Baal slaughtered a bull and placed it on a pile of wood. For the whole day, they prayed to their God to come down and set the wood on fire to complete the sacrifice. But nothing happened. When Elijah's turn came, he built an altar on which he placed wood with a sacrificial animal exactly as the false prophets did. But he went one step further. He dug a trench around the altar and filled it with water, even dousing the wood as well. Then he drenched the altar 2 more times to make sure that it was thoroughly soaked. Finally, Elijah uttered a simple prayer to the Lord. What then happened is one of the most dramatic events in the Bible. Immediately the fire of the Lord came down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and even the dust. The fire even licked up all of the water in the trench. When all of the people saw this sight, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, "The Lord, He is the God! The Lord, He is the God!" Kiriath Jearim is a village about 15 kilometers from Jerusalem on the road to Jaffa. The glory of this place is that the Ark of the Covenant between God and His people was sheltered here for nearly 50 years. Although the Philistines had captured the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites, they surrendered it almost immediately and returned it, because having it caused the Philistine people immense trouble and sickness. The Israelite town Beth Shemesh welcomed back the Ark of the Covenant from the Philistines, but soon they requested Kiriath Jearim to take it away after 20 of their men died when they looked at the Ark. The men of Kiriath Jearim came forward to accept the Ark of the Lord. Here the Ark was placed in the home of Abinadab. His son Eleazar was charged for its safekeeping. Finally, after 20 years, King David moved the Ark to his new capital city of Jerusalem, where it was placed in the tabernacle where it belonged. Since no one was killed for disrespecting or misusing the Ark, it stands to reason that Eleazar must have taken the utmost care of the Ark of the Covenant. Any discussion of the unique geographical features of the Holy Land would be incomplete without giving attention to the Dead Sea. Situated at the lowest point on the surface of the earth, 1,300 feet below sea level, the Dead Sea receives water from the Jordan River and other small streams in the Negev. However, no water is ever released to continue on its way to the ocean, as would any other normal body of water. The scorching sun in the surrounding Negev desert evaporates the water as quickly as it flows into the lake. Over the centuries, the salts and the minerals left behind have turned this body of water into a stagnant pool in which few living things can survive, thus acquiring the name Dead Sea. Overlooking the Dead Sea on the northwestern shore is a place called Kirbet Qumran. Here in 1947, the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls was found in one of the area's several caves. More than 800 ancient manuscripts were found in 11 different caves in the area. Of these, more than 200 were copies of Old Testament books. Most of these scrolls were dated to the 1st or 2nd century BC. The most famous of the Dead Sea Scrolls is a complete manuscript of the book of Isaiah, written in the Hebrew language. It is truly amazing how these scrolls survived 2,100 years of being stored in caves. They had been wrapped carefully and then placed in airtight clay jars. The hot and dry atmosphere of the Dead Sea kept them intact for these many centuries. Possible the miracle at work in the preservation of these scrolls is as the Bible tells us about it in 1 Peter 1:24 and 25, which says, "The grass withereth, and the flower thereof falleth away, but the word of the Lord endureth forever." The shrine houses the Isaiah scroll, which dates from the 2nd century BCE and is the most intact of the Dead Sea Scrolls, as well as the Aleppo Codex, dating from the 10th century CE, the oldest existing Hebrew Bible. The building's white tiled dome is shaped like the lid of the first jar in which the scrolls were found at Qumran. In contrast, nearby stands a black basalt wall. The black-white imagery symbolizes the theme of one of the scrolls, the war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness. The rest of the structure, 2/3 of it below ground level, recalls the caves in which the scrolls were found. The Shrine of the Book is a wing of the Israel Museum in Western Jerusalem. Also on the museum's campus is an extensive outdoor Second Temple model of Jerusalem in AD 66, before its destruction by the Romans. The Shrine of the Book holds all 7 of the scrolls found in what is called Cave 1 at Qumran near the Dead Sea. They are Isaiah A, Isaiah B, the Habakkuk Commentary, the Thanksgiving Scroll, the Community Rule, or the Manual of Discipline, the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness, or the War Rule, and the Genesis Apocryphon. All are written in ancient Hebrew except the last, which is in Aramaic. A facsimile of the scroll of Isaiah, which is arranged around a huge elevated spindle, provides a dramatic centerpiece in the exhibition hall under the dome. Also at the shrine of the book is the temple scroll, the best preserved of the Qumran scrolls. At more than 8 meters in length, it is the longest of the Qumran manuscripts. The community rule is the rule book for the group who wrote or copied the Library of Scrolls. This group is believed to be comprised of Essenes, a strict Jewish sect who lived an austere lifestyle in their remote desert surroundings. These scrolls were the oldest copies of biblical manuscripts that had ever been found. They were about 1,000 years older than the manuscripts that had been used to translate the Bible from Hebrew into modern languages up till that time. Careful examination of these scrolls revealed that they are essentially the same as the copies that were made nearly 1,000 years later. The very few differences are attributed to the process of copying and recopying these documents over several centuries. The bottom line is that the text of the Bible we use today is basically the same as the words written down many centuries ago. The Herodium was planned as an enormous complex of palaces, the largest in the Roman world at the time, consisting of 3 parts. 1. The Mountain Palace Fortress, a unique combination of a palace, a fortress, and an outstanding landmark. 2. Lower Herodium, containing an extravagant entertainment area, an administrative center, and the king's funeral complex. 3. The Mountain Slope. On the northern part, alongside a ceremonial staircase, Herod built his tomb and royal theater. Shortly before he died, Herod ensured that he would never be forgotten by building stage by stage a meticulously planned complex which covered 250 dunams or 62.5 acres. The palace was divided into a number of wings. The eastern half was a large colonnaded courtyard used as an ornamental garden.
2 years old.
Guilty in the womb! Guilty in the stars! I'll bring...
The entrance to the palace was located at the northeastern end of the complex. The western half contained the bathhouses, dwellings, a cross-shaped courtyard, and an opulent reception hall. Although Herodium was located on the edge of the desert, the city had an abundant water supply from afar, flourishing gardens and bathhouses. In the center was the round, tepid room, topped by a cupola that survived entirely and is one of its kind in Israel. The floor of the hot room rested on small pillars. The heating system channeled hot air in the pillared space, and from there into the room through conduits carved into the walls and vaulted ceiling. All of the palace walls were plastered and decorated with frescoes and stucco of various designs. The royal apartments at the top of the tower enjoyed a sweeping view and a breeze on hot days. The large tower on the east, of which only the solid base survived, rose to some 40 meters. An underground tunnel network was constructed. The upper entrance to the underground tunnel network is situated at the foot of the eastern tower. The lower opening is located on the northern slope above the theater. These branching tunnels, linking ancient spaces, emerged from the fortress and led to concealed exits through which the rebels could sally forth and surprise the Roman forces if the latter made it to the mountaintop. 2 of these exits are located near Herod's tomb. Herod was apparently born in 74 BC into an influential family of Idumean origin. During the Hasmonean period, many Idumeans converted to Judaism and entered the service of the kingdom. Herod's grandfather Antipas served as the governor of Idumea under the Hasmonean king Alexander Jannaeus. Herod's father Antipater served as an advisor to John Hyrcanus II. The temple and the city at Mount Gerizim were destroyed by John Hyrcanus I at the end of the 2nd century BC. In 47 BC, Herod was appointed ruler of Galilee, and in that same year he married the first of his 10 wives. After the Sanhedrin tried him for executing Jewish rebels in Galilee, he was forced to flee. but under the aegis of the Romans he conquered the rest of the country. In 37 BC, he became the king of Judea, where he ruled until he died. Herod's reign marked the end of the Hasmonean dynasty, and he ruled under Roman auspices, but with a great deal of autonomy. He was famous for grandiose building projects, including the rebuilding of the temple. In addition to founding cities like Caesarea and Samaria, he built the port at Caesarea, as well as palaces, temples, gardens, and water systems, and also strengthened desert fortresses. In the 3rd decade BC, Herod began to build Herodium, apparently as a government and administrative center in Judea, leaving Jerusalem mainly as the religious center. He named his magnificent project after himself. Herod's mausoleum, which was discovered on the eastern slope of the mountain facing Jerusalem, was built on a square foundation and rose to a height of approximately 25 meters. The remains of 3 sarcophagi, or stone coffins, were found near the mausoleum. The reddish coffin, adorned with rosettes, was apparently Herod's. Relatives were probably interred in the other 2, which were made of white stone. Rebels razed the mausoleum to the ground during the Great Revolt. The sarcophagus attributed to Herod was found smashed to bits. The other 2 coffins were undoubtedly tossed out of the mausoleum and were found broken at its base. The city of David is where Jerusalem was born, the place where it all begins. In Jerusalem will I put my name. David captures Jerusalem from the Jebusites. David relocates the Ark of the Covenant to its permanent home in Jerusalem. Solomon builds the temple in Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon destroys Jerusalem. After the exile, Nehemiah rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem. As an infant, Jesus is recognized as the Messiah in the temple at Jerusalem. As a boy, Jesus talks to teachers of the law in the temple at Jerusalem. The crowd at Jerusalem hail Jesus as a hero. Jesus grieves over Jerusalem's hostility and unbelief. On the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, the Holy Spirit fills believers. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, is stoned in Jerusalem. The Apostle Paul is falsely accused of bringing a Gentile into the temple at Jerusalem. The Apostle John foresees a new Jerusalem, a beautiful city without sin in the end times. Jerusalem first appears in the Bible as Salem, the city of Melchizedek. The might of the city is reflected in the Egyptian execration texts that refer to it as one of the Canaanite cities that threatened Egyptian hegemony in the region. Jerusalem is also mentioned in the 14th century BC El Amarna letters found in the royal archives of Pharaonic Egypt. Adonizedek, the Canaanite ruler of Jerusalem, was defeated by Joshua during the Israelite conquest of the land, but the city itself remained in Canaanite hands. David, the son of Jesse, the second king of Israel, conquered the small Jebusite city and made it his capital, the city of David. David and Solomon ruled here, and the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah spoke their eternal words from this city. David's choice of Jerusalem for his capital was partly based on the presence of perennial water source, the Gihon Spring, its central location, its neutral territory, and its possessing a long heritage of sanctity linking it to ancient Salem and to Mount Moriah, the traditional site of the binding of Isaac. David built the royal palace and brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city, transforming it into a spiritual and a political center. David's son Solomon enlarged the city to include Mount Moriah, where he built the temple and his royal palace. After Solomon died, the kingdom was divided into 2, and Jerusalem remained the capital of Judah only. Toward the end of the 8th century BC, the Assyrians vanquished the Kingdom of Israel and its capital, Samaria. Refugees from the Kingdom of Israel flocked to Jerusalem and settled in new neighborhoods built on the western hill, around which a broad wall was constructed. Soon afterwards, Assyrians conquered the cities of Judah, but failed in their attempt to capture the capital city of Jerusalem. But 100 years later, the Babylonians conquered the city and razed it to the ground. The period of return to Zion in the late 6th BCE saw the renewal of Jewish settlement in Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the temple. Nehemiah, the governor, rebuilt the ruined walls of the city of David in 444 BCE. During the Second Temple period, Jerusalem expanded again toward the Western Hill, the location of Upper City. In the city of David, that was a part of the Lower City, Queen Helena built several palaces for herself and her family. But in the revolt against Rome in 66 to 70 CE, the city of David was again razed to the ground. In 135 CE, the Roman Emperor Hadrian built his pagan city, Aelia Capitolina, on the ruins of Jewish Jerusalem using stones quarried in the city of David. Toward the end of the Ottoman period, Jewish settlement was renewed on the hill when the Meüas family built their home in 1873. A few years later, in 1885, a large group of Yemenite Jews settled in the village of Kafar Hashiluj, which they established next to the village of Silwan. Toward the end of the 19th century, when archaeological exploration in Jerusalem began, discoveries made on the hill led to its identification as the ancient core of Jerusalem. Scholars and archaeological expeditions from all over the world flocked to the site, which soon became the most excavated mound in the history of archaeology. The city can be visited today on essentially the same site it occupied in Abraham's time. It has been inhabited continually for more than 5,000 years, and interestingly, people from all over the world have been visiting this ancient city for centuries. Perhaps the most unusual observation about Jerusalem is that 3 of the world's major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, consider it a holy site. Each religion has its own reasons for holding the city in such high esteem. King Hezekiah of Judah constructed the Pool of Siloam, also known as Hezekiah's Pool. He ordered its construction to store water for Jerusalem in case of a prolonged siege by the Assyrian army. The same king shored up other defenses around the city, including instituting the construction of the Broad Wall. Hezekiah built the storage pool inside the walls of Jerusalem, but the city's main water source, the Gihon Spring, was outside of the walls. He dealt with this problem by constructing a tunnel of more than 1,700 feet through solid rock to bring water from the spring to the reservoir inside of the city. This project is considered one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of biblical times. One group of workmen began digging at the Gihon Spring, and another group started digging at the opposite end near the Pool of Siloam. Probably after several months of back-breaking labor, the laborers met in the middle, more than 100 feet beneath the city. The water walk through the Siloam Tunnel takes about 45 minutes and is recommended for visitors of all ages, tall enough to wade through about 2 feet of flowing water. An inscription chiseled into the wall of the tunnel was discovered several years after the tunnel itself was uncovered. The inscription was interpreted as a joyful meeting in Hezekiah's tunnel. About 700 years after Hezekiah's time, the Pool of Siloam and its tunnel were still in use. However, the exact location of the original pool as it existed during the time of Jesus remained a mystery until June 2004. This Canaanite tunnel is the Jebusite tunnel that predates Hezekiah's tunnel. Visitors can see Hezekiah's tunnel and walk through the narrow Canaanite tunnel. This tunnel, originated by the Canaanites, was built circa 1850 BCE. This was the original water source that carried the water from the pool all the way to the city of David. This very tunnel was filled with waist-deep water that King David and his general Joab would have walked through in their conquering of Jerusalem. During construction work to repair a large water pipe south of Jerusalem's Temple Mount at the southern end of the ridge known as the City of David, archaeologists Ronnie Reich and Eli Shukron identified 2 ancient stone steps. Further excavation revealed that they were part of a monumental pool from the Second Temple period, the period in which Jesus lived. The structure, Reich and Shukron discovered, was 225 feet long, with corners that are slightly greater than 90 degrees, indicating a trapezoidal shape, with the widening end oriented towards Tyropoeon Valley. The Siloam Pool is adjacent to the area in the ancient city of David known as the King's Garden, and is just southeast of the remains of the 5th century church and pool, traditionally believed to be the sacred Christian site. The Tower of David, also known as the Jerusalem Citadel, is an ancient citadel located near the Jaffa Gate, an entrance to the old city of Jerusalem. The citadel that stands today dates back to the Mamluk and Ottoman periods. It was built on the site of an earlier ancient fortification of the Hasmonean, Herodian, Byzantine and early Muslim periods after being destroyed repeatedly during the last decades of the Crusades. The name Tower of David is due to Byzantine Christians who believed the site to be the palace of King David. They borrowed the name Tower of David from the Song of Songs, which are attributed to Solomon, King David's son, who wrote, "Thy neck is like the Tower of David builded for an armory, whereon there hang 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men." As evidenced by the archaeological discovery of the Broad Wall, King Hezekiah was the first to specifically fortify this area, and by the late 8th century, the city had expanded to include the hill to the west of the Temple Mount. The motivation for building the walled fortification was the expected invasion of Judea by Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. This wall might be the one referred to in Nehemiah 3:8 and Isaiah 22:9-10. What remains of the Tower of David is part of the huge defensive tower that Herod the Great built in the first Christian century to provide extra protection against an enemy attack on Jerusalem's northwest side. One of Herod's palaces was also built close to this tower. When the Romans destroyed this city in AD 70, apparently part of this tower was left standing as a testimony to their conquest of the city. Herod, who defeated the Hasmonean dynasty, added 3 massive towers to the fortifications in 37 to 34 BC. Herod named the tallest of the towers, rising 145 feet in height, the Phasael in memory of his brother who had committed suicide while in captivity. Another tower was called the Mariamne, after his second wife, whom he ordered to be executed and buried in a cave west of the tower. He named the third tower the Hippicus, after one of his friends. Of the 3 towers, only the base of one of them remains today, either the Phasael or the Hippicus. In 1310, the citadel was rebuilt by the Mamluk Sultan, An-Nasir Muhammad ibn Quaylan, who gave it much of its present shape. The citadel was expanded between 1537 and 1541 by the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, whose architects designed a large entrance behind which stood a cannon emplacement. For 400 years, the citadel served as a garrison for Turkish troops. The Ottomans also installed a mosque near the southwest corner of the citadel, erecting a minaret during the years 1635 to 1655. In the 19th century, the conspicuous minaret that still stands today took over the title of Tower of David, so that the name can now refer to either the whole citadel or the minaret alone. According to the Bible, David was buried in the city of David, presumably in the southeast of the present Siloam area. Traditionally, the later kings of the Davidic dynasty were also buried there, and the Bible refers to the sepulchres of the sons of David, whose site was still known in the time of Nehemiah. The tombs were in Jerusalem, but they were never touched. The site is also mentioned in the New Testament. However, this holy site is located in one of the most interesting buildings in Jerusalem. As David is considered one of Israel's great heroes, his tomb is considered a Jewish shrine. David's tomb sits in the lower floor of a Christian church that was built several centuries ago. The visitor who goes up one floor higher will find himself at the traditional site of the upper room, where Jesus celebrated the memorial supper with his disciples, and one more floor higher is a Muslim mosque. This is one of the few places in the world where sites considered sacred by 3 major religions are together under one roof. The traditional site of Absalom's tomb is located on the eastern slope of the Kidron Valley, located on the east side of Jerusalem. Josephus wrote about this tomb, which existed in the 1st century AD. The tomb, which stands 20 feet high and 24 feet square, has been traditionally identified as the tomb of Absalom, who led a rebellion against his own father, King David. When Cushi answered, "The enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee harm, be as that young man is." And the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, thus he said, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom! Would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son." Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale. For he said, "I have no son to keep my name in remembrance." And he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called unto this day Absalom's place. Among the most famous of Jesus' miracles recounted in the Gospel of John is Jesus' healing of the paralytic at the pool of Bethesda, which means house of mercy. When Jesus heals the paralytic, as explained in the Gospel of John, the Bethesda pool is described as having 5 porticos, which most scholars dismissed as an unhistorical literary creation. Yet when this site was excavated in the 1900s, a rectangular pool with 2 basins separated by a wall was revealed, thus a 5-sided pool, each side having a portico. The location of the pool of Bethesda, which is actually a series of reservoirs and medicinal pools, is in the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem's Old City, north of the Temple Mount, and about 50 meters inside St. Stephen's or the Lion's Gate. At that time, the gate was called the Sheep Gate, because sheep were brought to the temple for sacrifice through this entrance. According to ancient tradition, Bethesda is also where Jesus' maternal grandparents, Anne and Joachim, lived, and so this is where his mother Mary was born. The Church of St. Anne, built around 1140, stands nearby. The Byzantine Empress Eudocia had an enormous basilica constructed over the pool of Bethesda in the 5th century. The church was dedicated to Mary where she was born. Its central aisle covered the central rock wall, the side aisles extended above the 2 basins, and the front part covered the site of the ancient healing sanctuary. The basilica was destroyed by the Persians in 614, and its masonry ended up in the pool. The Crusaders built a small chapel, the Church of the Paralytic, over part of the basilica. Its facade, the main entrance, and the apse of the Crusader chapel can be seen standing high over the pools, giving a clear example of the practice of building one church over another. Solomon's pools may be visited when traveling between Bethlehem and Hebron. In more recent years, the pools are in the West Bank under Palestinian authority. Solomon, who ruled about 970 to 931 BC, is said to have developed vineyards, gardens, and pools. Several springs feed into the Pools of Solomon from the south through 2 aqueducts. Each of the 3 pools of great size, which are nearly 150 yards in length by half as much in breadth and approximately 40 feet in depth, are so arranged on the natural slope of the ground that the bottom of the upper pool is higher than the surface of the next. Formed by walls of massive masonry stretching across the valley, the object evidently is to collect and store as much water as possible. Herod the Great was responsible for carrying the water by aqueduct to his fortress at Herodium, located only a couple of kilometers outside Bethlehem. During the Ottoman period, water from Solomon's pools would reach Jerusalem via a 4-inch clay pipe. The pools are chiefly hewn out of the native rock, the upper one especially being considerably heightened by masonry and strengthened by buttresses. Ba is a Jewish, Babylonian, Aramaic word which literally means son, while bat means daughter in Hebrew, and mitzvah means commandment or law. Thus, bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah literally translate to son of commandment and daughter of commandment. The family of bat mitzvah is often honored and recognized during the service with an aliyah or multiple aliyahs. The custom in many synagogues is for the Torah to be passed from grandparents to parents to the bat mitzvah herself, symbolizing the passing down of the obligation to engage in the study of Torah and Judaism. While the bat mitzvah ceremony is a milestone life cycle event and is the culmination of years of study, it is actually not the end of a girl's Jewish education. The event simply marks the beginning of a lifetime of Jewish learning, study, and participation in the Jewish community. The religious initiation ceremony of a Jewish boy who has reached the age of 13 is now regarded as ready to observe religious precepts and eligible to take part in public worship. The bar mitzvah ceremony is an important and time-honored rite of passage. The young man is called to the Torah for the first time and often chants a portion of the Torah reading or the Haftorah, reading from the prophets that he has prepared.
For the Lord thy God will go with you. He will not fail you.
Amen.
יעלה בכבוד חתן בר המצווה.
The Western Wall, which was a part of the most magnificent building Jerusalem had ever seen, was one of 4 walls Herod the Great built to support the 1,555,000 square feet plaza on which the temple stood. The rest of the wall, which is only 1,500 feet long, can be viewed inside the Western Wall tunnel. Its grand architecture is not the reason for the Western Walls becoming an inseparable part for the Jewish people. Solomon, who built the first temple, said, "That thine eyes may be open toward this house night and day, even toward the place of which thou hast said, My name shall be there." King David bought the land, and Solomon built the temple, but it was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC.
Is a house of prayer!
Herod expanded the second temple that was burnt by the Romans in 70 CE, with the exception of the Western Wall. It was then the Talmudic sages began to teach. This is the Western Wall of the temple, which is never destroyed because the divine presence is in the West. In the Middle Ages, the wall received another name, the Wailing Wall, as the Jews were observed here lamenting the temple's destruction. With the establishment of Western Wall Heritage Foundation in 1988, the excavations project, along with opening the tunnels to the public, has been continued to this present day. The Western Wall Tunnel Excavation Project, conducted with great thoroughness under careful Jewish law and scientific supervision, has revealed to the public the Jerusalem during its glory days from 2,000 years ago. The Western Wall tunnels are a sort of time tunnel to ancient Jerusalem, and every visitor is directly swept back to Jerusalem's glory days as they were during the 1st century CE. However, the visit is not only a trip through time, but also a powerful lesson in Jewish history, as well as the archaeology and topography of the city. The excavations also revealed the carefully carved immense stone courses of the wall, incredibly well preserved, ancient water pits, an ancient water tunnel from the Hasmonean period that was blocked by Herod when he expanded the site of the Temple Mount, and impressive Muslim construction projects from the Middle Ages that, to a great extent, preserved the wall through the years.
Look, do you see? Nazareth. That's where we live.
The towering cupola of the Church of Annunciation in Nazareth stands over the cave that tradition holds to be the home of the Virgin Mary. The massive two-level basilica, with its modern architectural style and colorful decoration, became the largest Christian church in the Middle East when it was completed in 1969. Some parts of the old churches from the periods of Crusaders and Byzantine can be seen around the grotto, including the interior of the grotto with the altar dedicated to the Annunciation. The lower church is centered around the grotto, which according to tradition was the home of Mary and the site of the Annunciation. Here, the Archangel Gabriel told the young Mary that she would become the mother of the Son of God. And here, Mary voiced her consent. "Be it unto me, according to thy word." The words of the angel Gabriel became flesh through the Virgin Mary, and lived among us. On the altar inside the grotto, the words of John the Apostle are inscribed in Latin. Here, the Word was made flesh, referring to John 1:14. The stairs behind leads to a small cave known to be Mary's kitchen and serves as an exit, and on the right stands the column where the angel probably appeared. The Church of St. Joseph in Nazareth is built over the carpentry workshop of the husband of the Virgin Mary. This solid and unpretentious building stands very much in the shadow of the soaring cupola of the Church of the Annunciation, just as Joseph himself lived in the shadow of Jesus and Mary. To the left of the entrance is a mosaic floor inscribed with the following words written in Greek: "For Konon, Deacon of Jerusalem." This deacon may have been the founder of the Byzantine Church and may have been responsible for converting the House of Mary into the first church on the site circa AD 427. The position of deacon is recognized as an honorable one in the church.
Amen.
Amen.
A stairway in the church descends to the crypt, where caverns can be seen through a grill in the floor. Some more steps lead even further to a 2-meter square basin or pit with a black and white mosaic floor, which is believed to have been used as a baptistry prior to the period of Constantine or even as early as the 1st century. While in Ein Kerem, pilgrims have the opportunity to visit a spring in the middle of the village. This spring, which has an abundance of water, flows between the two churches located in this village. This spring also gives the village this name, Ein, or spring, Kerem, vineyard, meaning spring of the vineyard. This water source is also known as Mary's Spring, because of a tradition that the Virgin Mary stopped here for a drink while visiting Elizabeth. On the hillside overlooking Ein Kerem is the church known as the Church of Visitation. Going beyond the Gospel episode, the same church conserves the memory of the hiding of St. John the Baptist, taken up by the apocryphal Proto-Evangelium of John, 2nd century. Beyond a small valley full of trees is the mountain toward which Elizabeth ran with her own son, saying, "Mountain, receive a mother and son." And the mountain opened and offered them refuge. Herod's soldiers who were following them reached that point and, finding no one, became confused and returned. Even today, visitors can see the place where this happened, which is marked on this rock. As early as the 7th century in Rome, relics of earth from the grotto of Elizabeth and John were conserved in the Lateran treasury and elsewhere. The stone exposed in the crypt continues this tradition today. From this grotto flows a spring that quenched the thirst of Elizabeth and John while they were in the mountain, staying there, served by an angel until the death of Herod. This church commemorates Mary's visit to Elizabeth after Mary learnt Elizabeth would give birth to the Messiah. When the two expectant mothers met, the baby leaped within Elizabeth's womb as she was filled with the Holy Spirit. Seven centuries before the birth of Jesus, the prophet Isaiah spoke, "The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. For I say unto you, among those that are born of women, there is not a greater prophet than John the Baptist." In this village of Ein Kerem, John the Baptist, the son of Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth, was born. One day, when Zechariah, as a priest in the Jerusalem temple, was praying, the angel Gabriel appeared at the right side of the altar and told him that his prayer for a son had been heard. Zechariah's wife Elizabeth would give birth to a child, and they were to name the baby John. However, Zechariah did not believe the declaration of the angel, as both he and his wife were far too old to conceive a baby. Because of his unbelief, the angel rendered Zechariah deaf and mute until the child was born. The first church dedicated to him was built on this site more than 1,500 years ago. The Church of St. John the Baptist that marks the site today is a successor of the earlier buildings. Underneath the church is a cave believed to be the spot where John was born in the home of Zechariah and Elizabeth. On the walls inside of the church are paintings including John's baptism in the Jordan River, Herod Antipas's beheading of John, and John's preaching in the wilderness of Judea. Bethlehem was also known as Ephrath. Bethlehem was the birthplace and hometown of King David. In Bethlehem, Samuel anointed David to succeed Saul as Israel's king. Naomi gleaned in the fields of Boaz near Bethlehem. The prophet Micah predicted that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Jacob's wife, Rachel, was buried somewhere near Bethlehem. Shepherds journeyed to Bethlehem to see the newborn Messiah. Wise men from the east brought gifts to Jesus in Bethlehem. The Door of Humility, a small rectangular entrance to the church, was created in the Ottoman times to prevent carts from being driven in by looters and to force even the most important visitor to dismount from his horse as he entered the holy place. The doorway was reduced from an earlier Crusader doorway, the pointed arch of which can still be seen above the current door. The first evidence of a cave in Bethlehem being venerated as Christ's birthplace is in the writings of Justin Martyr around AD 160. The tradition was also attested by Origen and Sebius in the 3rd century. In 326, Constantine and his mother, St. Helena, commissioned a church to be built over the cave. This first church, dedicated on the 31st of May 339, had an octagonal floor plan and was placed directly above the cave. In the center, a 4-meter-wide hole surrounded by a railing provided a view of the cave. The Grotto of the Nativity, a rectangular cavern beneath the church, is the Church of the Nativity's focal point. Entered by a flight of steps by the church altar is the cave that has been honored as the site of Christ's birth since at least the 2nd century. The silver star in the floor marks the very spot where Christ is believed to be born. The star's Latin inscription reads, "Here of the Virgin Mary, Jesus Christ was born, 1717. The floor is paved marble, and 15 lamps hang above the star, 6 of them belonging to the Greeks, 5 to the Armenians, and 4 to the Romans.
And see if there's some fresh straw. That'll keep him warm. I'll take care of her, poor girl."
Steps away from the birthplace shrine is the Chapel of the Manger, owned by the Roman Catholics. The Constantinian church was destroyed in AD 530 by Justinian, who built the much larger church that remains today. The Persians spared it during their invasion in AD 614 because they were impressed by a representation of the Magi, fellow Persians who decorated the building. St. Jerome, born in AD 342, lived and worked in Bethlehem near the Grotto of the Nativity from AD 384, and he died on September the 30th, 420, in his cell a few steps away from the Grotto of the Nativity, and was buried in a cave beneath the Church of the Nativity. The doctor of the church dedicated his life to the Word of God, and precisely in the town of Judea, he completed his Latin translation of the Bible, the Vulgate. The Church of the Nativity was much neglected in the Mamluk and Ottoman periods, but not destroyed. Portions of the floor mosaic survive from this period. However, much of the church's marble was looted by the Ottomans and now adorns the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. An earthquake in 1834 and a fire in 1869 destroyed the furnishings of the cave, but the church again survived. In 1852, shared custody of the church was granted to the Roman Catholic, Armenian, and Greek Orthodox churches. A short distance from the Church of the Nativity is the place where Jesus and his parents hid from the death order of King Herod before their flight to Egypt. Its name comes from the milk that dropped on the floor while Mary was nursing the infant Jesus. Countless letters and baby pictures sent from around the world to the milk grotto testify to the effectiveness of the milk powder and prayer. It is believed that mixing the soft white chalk with their food and praying to Our Lady, Mother of Jesus, will increase the quantity of milk or enable them to become pregnant. The grotto has been a site of veneration since the 4th century, the first structure being built over it around AD 385. From as early as the 7th century, fragments from the cave were sent to churches in Europe. The site was recognized by a proclamation of Pope Gregory XI in 1375. The Franciscans erected a church around the milk grotto in 1872. The people of Bethlehem, local artisans, expressed their love for the site by decorating the shrine with mother-of-pearl carvings. In 2007, a modern chapel dedicated to the Mother of God was opened. The little town where Jesus is said to have been born is the site of the Church of the Nativity, which is ablaze with flags and decorations every Christmas. On the eve of Christmas, there is a parade through the town. Bagpipes and drums thump through the square directly in front of the Church of the Nativity. Christmas joy is enjoyed as hundreds follow the colorful procession through the ancient city.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. And Happy New Year. I hope it's a happy year.
So do I.
Okay, good luck.
The head of the Roman Catholic Church in the Holy Land, Latin Patriarch Fuad Twal, waves to the worshippers upon his arrival at the Church of the Nativity. Christians from all throughout the world have packed Manger Square to celebrate the birth of Jesus in the ancient West Bank town of Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. Perhaps the most famous part of Christmas in Bethlehem is the midnight mass in the Nativity Church. This plot of land on the outskirts of Bethlehem is reputed to be the place where angels announced the birth of Jesus to lowly shepherds. A tent-shaped chapel of the angels adjoins the remains of a 4th century church. Paintings in the chapel depict the angels' announcement to the shepherds paying homage to Jesus, and the shepherds celebrating the birth of Jesus, the Messiah. Beyond the chapel is a cave for small group worship. This Catholic site is superintended by the Franciscan priests. In this same field, Naomi gleaned behind the harvesters in the grain fields of Boaz. Beit Seher, originally known as the Village of the Shepherds, is now in the eastern suburb of Bethlehem. In the eastern part of Beit Seher is the red-domed Greek Orthodox Church. Caves where shepherds kept watch over their flocks still abound in the area east of Bethlehem. Here the Gospel of Luke tells us that an angel announced the birth of Jesus. The angel's good news was not given to the noble or to the pious, but to workers with a low reputation. Jewish literature ranked shepherd as among the most despised occupations of the time, but Christ was to identify himself with this occupation when he called himself the Good Shepherd. The Jordan River runs through the land and history of the Bible, giving its waters a spiritual significance that sets it aside from other rivers. The Jordan River is significant to the Jews because the tribes of Israel under Joshua crossed it on dry ground to enter the promised land after years of wandering in the desert. The prophets Elijah and Elisha also crossed the Jordan River on dry ground. The Syrian general Naaman was healed of leprosy after washing in the Jordan River at Elisha's instruction. The Jordan River is important to Christians because John the Baptist baptized Jesus in this river. After baptism, as Jesus came up out of the water, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and settling on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The Gospel of John cites this miracle at Cana as the first of the following 7 signs of Jesus to show his unique mission as the Son of God: turning the water into wine, healing a government official's son, healing a paralyzed man, feeding the 5,000, walking on water, healing a man born blind, and raising Lazarus from the dead. According to long Christian tradition, the modern Arab village of Kafr Cana now occupies the site of ancient Cana. Located about 5 miles north of Nazareth, this village has a Catholic church known as the Wedding Church that is built on the site where the water turned into wine miracle took place. Cana is a popular wedding site, as well as a place where many married couples renew their wedding vows. Cana was also the location of another miracle of Jesus. He was passing through this village on another occasion when a government official from nearby Capernaum approached him. He begged Jesus to come to his home to heal his dying son. After verifying his faith, Jesus told the man to go back home and his son would live. When this official reached home, he discovered that his son had recovered at exactly the time when Jesus declared him healed. This village on the shore of the lake is the only place referred to in the Gospels as his own city. Jesus lived here for 2 years, the longest period of time he spent at any one place during his public ministry. After his rejection at Nazareth, Jesus came to Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee and made it the headquarters of his Galilean ministry. But during his earthly ministry, many people refer to him as Jesus of Nazareth. Even the sign Pilate posted on his cross referred to him as Jesus of Nazareth. Capernaum had no special features that set the place apart from all the other villages in the region of Galilee. So then, why did Jesus decide to settle there? Perhaps because this was the place where at least 5 of his 12 disciples lived. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen in Galilee, and Matthew was a tax collector in the town. In the synagogue, Jesus taught with authority. Jesus healed a demon-possessed man in this same synagogue. Jesus restored a man's deformed hand in the same synagogue. Near Capernaum, Jesus claimed to be the bread of life. Jesus healed a Roman soldier's sick son in Capernaum. Jesus healed a lame man who who was brought to Jesus on a mat. In Capernaum, Jesus used the example of a child to teach his disciples about service and humility. In spite of all these good works that Jesus did, the people were generally unresponsive to his message. He condemned the town for its unbelief, along with the nearby villages of Bethsaida and Chorazin. In Capernaum, today known as Tel Hum, archaeologists have discovered the remains of a synagogue that was built during AD 300. This is obviously not the synagogue where Jesus taught and healed. Underneath this building, archaeologists have found ruins of yet another synagogue from the New Testament period. These could, however, be the foundation stones of the synagogue in which Jesus taught and healed. Another popular site at Tel Hum or Capernaum is the Octagonal Church, which was built over the remains of another church from AD 400s. This earlier church had been built over the reputed site of Peter's house, a place pilgrims have venerated as far back as the first Christian century. The modern church on the site was designed to protect the remains of the house. Visitors are allowed to view them from above the church's glass floor. A few hundred feet away is the reputed site where Jesus met his disciples near the Sea of Galilee after his resurrection. Here Jesus restored Peter to his leadership position among the disciples after Peter's denial of Jesus. The Catholic Church on this site is known as the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter. About 2 miles southwest of Capernaum is a site known as Tabcha, the place where tradition claims Jesus miraculously multiplied a boy's lunch to feed a hungry crowd of more than 5,000 people. A church on the site known as the Church of the Multiplication commemorates this event. While visiting Capernaum and Tabcha, most Holy Land visitors climb a nearby hillside where Jesus' reputed Sermon on the Mount was delivered to his followers. This place, which is known as the Mount of Beatitudes, is named for the 9 blessings, or Beatitudes, with which the sermon begins. A beautiful little chapel known as the Church of the Beatitudes, a perfect place for prayer and meditation on these teachings of Jesus, marks this spot. The rabbis have said, although God has created 7 seas, yet he has chosen the Sea of Galilee as his special delight. Jesus called 4 fishermen fishing on the lake as his disciples. To pay taxes, Jesus produced a coin from the mouth of a fish from the same waters. Jesus calmed a storm on the Galilee waters. Jesus taught a crowd from a fishing boat. Jesus produced a miraculous catch of fish from the lake. Jesus walked on the surface of the lake. After his resurrection, Jesus created another miraculous catch from the same lake. The Sea of Galilee, or the Kinneret, is Israel's largest freshwater reservoir. It is also the country's largest and most important source of drinking water. The Sea of Galilee played an important role in the early years of Christianity and has now become a pilgrimage site for many Christians. Jesus lived, preached, and performed miracles in the Kinneret and its surrounding area. Here Jesus walked on water, and the miracle of multiplying the loaves and fishes happened in nearby Capernaum. In 1986, 2 brothers from Kibbutz Ginosar, also known as Gennesaret, discovered the Galilee boat when a severe drought resulted in the lowering of the water level of the Sea of Galilee. The vessel had been buried under the sea and protected by the seabed sediments. With the help of many volunteers, the Israel Antiques Authority rescued the boat in the remarkable 11-day excavation. In the Miracle Center, the boat underwent an extensive, carefully monitored, 11-year-long conservation process in a specially built pool. The boat was submerged in a solution of heated polyethylene glycol. This synthetic wax replaced the water in the wood cells. The hull was then allowed to dry slowly and cleaned of the excess wax, thus allowing for its present exhibition in an atmosphere-controlled museum environment. This church commemorates Mary Magdalene, the woman out of whom Jesus cast 7 demons. She was present at the crucifixion and was one of the first followers of Jesus to see him after his resurrection. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things unto her. She is mentioned at least 12 times in the Gospels, more times than the Apostles. Matthew and Mark have said in their Gospels that 7 demons were sent out from her. She is most prominent in the narrative of the crucifixion of Jesus at which she was present. She was also present 2 days later, immediately following the Sabbath, when, according to all 4 canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, she was either alone or a member of a group of women to first testify to the resurrection of Jesus. John and Mark specifically name her as the first person to see Jesus after his resurrection. Some have considered her as fulfilling a role similar to that of Simon Peter among the male disciples. Mary Magdalene is considered to be a saint by the Catholic, Orthodox, Anglican, and Lutheran churches, with a feast day of July the 22nd. Other Protestant churches honor her as a heroine of the faith. The Eastern Orthodox Church also commemorates her on the Sunday of the Myrrh Bearers, the Orthodox equivalent of one of the Western traditions. Bethany became an important biblical town for the following major events of the Bible. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead in Bethany. Jesus was anointed at the house of Simon the leper in Bethany. Jesus returned to Bethany after his triumphant entry into Jerusalem. Jesus ascended into heaven near Bethany. Arriving at the tomb, Jesus called, "Lazarus,
Come forth!
To the amazement of the mourners who had witnessed the burial, the dead man walked out. Visitors walked down several crude stone steps into a gloomy underground chamber that has been venerated for centuries as the tomb of Lazarus. The little village of Bethany, which is today known by the Arabic name El Azariah, is located on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, about 3 kilometers from Jerusalem. Bethany was a favorite place of rest and refuge for Jesus. There is little doubt that this town is the successor to the small village of Bethany where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Jesus enjoyed the intimacy and friendship of his friends Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. When Lazarus was dying, as John's Gospel recounts, his sisters sent for Jesus. But Jesus delayed his arrival until 4 days after Lazarus had been buried, so that the Son of God might be glorified. While Christ was visiting his friend's home, Martha complained that her sister Mary, who was sitting at the Lord's feet and listening to him, had left all of the work to her. Christ replied, "Mary hath chosen that good part which shall not be taken away from her." A Catholic Franciscan church known as the Church of St. Lazarus, that was built on the site in 1955, commemorates this famous biblical event. The building sits on the remains of several other churches that were built successively on this spot across several centuries. Inside the church are mosaics depicting Jesus' raising of Lazarus, his anointing by Mary, and Lazarus with his 2 sisters. While no further mention of Lazarus is made in the Bible, the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic traditions offer varying accounts of the later events of his life. According to Orthodox tradition, sometime after the resurrection of Christ, Lazarus was forced to flee Judea because of rumored plots on his life, and he fled to Cyprus. There, he was appointed by Paul and Barnabas as the first bishop of Kition, present-day Larnaca. Lazarus is said to have lived for 30 more years. The church of Ios Lazaros was built over the reputed second tomb of Lazarus. According to the Bible, Jesus, after raising Lazarus from the dead, retired with his disciples to the town of Ephraim. John says, "Then from that day forth, they, the Pharisees, took counsel together to put him to death. Jesus therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but went thence unto a country near to the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim, and there continued with his disciples." Tayab has been identified as the site of Ophrah, which is mentioned in Joshua 18:23 as the town of Benjamin that was later renamed Ephraim. Although the exact location of Ephraim as referred in the Bible is unknown, some people believe the modern Palestinian town of Tayab marks the site today. In the 5th century, a church known today as St. George's Church was built in the town. In the 12th century, another church was built by the Crusaders, closely attached to the first church. The church and the castle were both destroyed during the Battle of Hattin that took place in 1187 between the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem and the forces of Kurdish Ayyubid Sultan Salah ad-Din, known in the West as Saladin. The Muslim armies under Saladin captured and killed the vast majority of the Crusader forces, removing their capability to wage war. These are the remaining ruins of St. George's Church, and there is the new church, the successor to the preceding churches that existed on the site. Northwest of the Old Testament Jericho is a high hill known as the Mount of Temptation, the traditional site of temptation of Jesus at the beginning of his public ministry. A visitor can either walk up the site over a rough path or ride up by cable car to the top of the hill where the Eastern Orthodox monastery was built. Jericho, which was located about 8 miles west of the Jordan River, was the first Canaanite city to fall to Joshua and the Israelites after they invaded the Promised Land. The city's defeat paved the way for the Israelites to swarm into the interior of Canaan on a fierce military campaign to claim the land. Joshua marched the Israelites around the walls of Jericho for 6 consecutive days. On the 7th day, the people marched around the city 6 times as before, and the 7th time they blew their trumpets and yelled as loudly as they could. At this cacophony, the wall collapsed, rendering the city and its defenders easy prey for the Israelites. While the city Joshua destroyed was never rebuilt, a new city was built about 2 miles from the former site. In this city, known as the New Testament Jericho, the following events took place. Jesus healed the blind man named Bartimaeus. In this new town, Jesus met the tax collector Zacchaeus in a sycamore tree. The Good Samaritan, who came to the aid of the man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. Jesus did not stay at Ephraim for long, as it was almost time for the Jewish Passover celebration, according to John 11:55. At this point, Jesus retired on a rocky hill, which was situated about 8 kilometers from this place towards Jordan, to fortify his spirit by prayer and fasting, but underwent temptation. For this reason, that rock hill is known as Quarental, from the Latin root quarenta, which meant 40, indicating his 40 days of fasting and prayer. This monastery complex is supposedly built around the cave where Jesus stayed during his 40 days of fasting. The physically short Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus, so he climbed up into a sycamore tree by the side of the road where Jesus was walking. According to the traditional belief, Zacchaeus climbed this tree to see Jesus as he was passing on this road in Jericho. To Zacchaeus' surprise, Jesus stopped below the sycamore tree where he was perched, looked up, and started to talk to him. Everybody around was amazed by what Jesus said to Zacchaeus, for Jesus asked the tax collector to come down from the tree immediately because he was going to stay at Zacchaeus' house that day. The story of Zacchaeus is the only biblical record of Jesus inviting himself to an individual's house. Zacchaeus did come down from the tree and welcomed Jesus gladly. According to the tradition, the inn was the location of the event of the Good Samaritan as narrated in Luke 10:30-35. The site was inhabited in the Hellenistic and Roman period. Remains from the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD were unearthed during the excavations of the inn. Probably as a part of a monastery, the Pilgrims' Inn was erected in the 6th century. The rectangular plan of the inn included residential rooms, a courtyard on the east, a basilica on the northwest side, and a large cistern in the center. The main entrance to the inn was from the south, while the animals entered to the courtyard from the east. A new archaeological museum was opened in 2009 on the location of the ancient site. The museum focuses on the unique collections of mosaic floors collected from ruins across the West Bank and Gaza. The external wall on the right is composed of constructions from 3 periods: the Byzantine period, the Crusader period, and the Ottoman period. A number of sarcophagi or burial coffins are also on display. These Roman stone coffins date to the Roman period and were found in Neapolis, Shechem. An ambo, pulpit or speaker's stand, remains from the Byzantine church of St. Theodore at Kerbet Beit Sila. From this platform, the scriptures were read. This is one of the most remarkable findings in early churches. The tombstone of Paul, the abbot of the martyrized monastery in the nearby city of Maal Adumim, is on display here. Abbot Paul headed the construction of the monastery during the period martyrized served as the Patriarch of Jerusalem, 478 to 486. This may be the only village in the world made famous by a donkey. Jesus sent 2 of his disciples into Bethphage to find a young donkey on which he could make his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. If the owners were asked why they were taking the animal, Jesus instructed his disciples to tell the owners, "Because the Lord hath need of him." Although the actual site of Bethphage is not known, tradition places it on the Mount of Olives near the town of Bethany. This traditional site is marked by a Catholic Franciscan chapel known as the Church of Bethphage. Inside the church is a beautiful painting depicting Jesus riding a donkey into Jerusalem, while the crowds place palm leaves and items of clothing on the ground to form a path for his triumphal entry. Something more important about Jesus' ride into Jerusalem is the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Centuries before Jesus came into the world, the prophet Zechariah declared about the Messiah, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just, and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass." On August the 15th, Catholics around the world celebrate the Feast of the Assumption, which commemorates the taking up of the Virgin Mary into heaven at the end of her earthly life. The feast is known by the Orthodox churches as the Dormition, falling asleep, of the Theotokos, which is also the name of the Catholic sanctuary in Jerusalem that commemorates the event. The Hagia Maria Zion, or Dormition Abbey. The massive Benedictine church, with its high domed bell tower visible from many points in the city, is situated on Mount Zion. The hill was part of the walled upper city in ancient times, but today is right outside of the old city walls, close to the Zion Gate. 2 spiral staircases lead down to a crypt, a round pillared room with a sculpture of Mary asleep in the center. Mary, known in Christian tradition as the personified daughter of Zion, is closely identified with the people of Israel, and it is fitting that her place of rest is preserved on Mount Zion, where Jesus instituted the Eucharist and where the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles at Pentecost. The location of the tomb of Mary is across the Kidron Valley from St. Stephen's Gate in the old city walls of Jerusalem, right before Gethsemane. Nothing is mentioned in the New Testament about the death and burial of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Nevertheless, a strong Christian tradition places her tomb in a church crypt at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Although apocryphal sources, such as the Transitus Mariae, have mentioned that the Virgin Mary's death and burial was in Jerusalem, these works are not considered authentic and therefore are not accepted as part of the Christian canon of Scripture. However, according to biblical scholar Lino Cinielli, all of them are traceable back to a single primitive document, a Judeo-Christian prototype clearly written within the Mother Church of Jerusalem sometime during the 2nd century, and composed for liturgical use right at the tomb of Our Lady. From the earliest times known, the tradition has assigned the authorship of the prototype to Lucius Carinus, said to have been a disciple and a fellow laborer with St. John the Evangelist. According to Transitus Mariae, Mary would have been aged no more than 50 when she died. Some sources explain that Virgin Mary died and was buried in the city of Ephesus, located in present-day Turkey. This claim is based on the Gospel account that Christ, on the cross before dying, entrusted the care of Mary to St. John, who later went to Ephesus. But the earliest traditions all consider the end of Mary's life in Jerusalem. The Catholic Encyclopedia recounts the following. The apocryphal works of the 2nd to the 4th century are all favorable to the Jerusalem tradition. According to the Acts of John, according to Prochorus, an apocryphal account of his journeys, miracles, and death, written by Lencius, 160-70, the evangelist went to Ephesus accompanied by Prochorus alone and at a very advanced age, in other words, after Mary's death. There was never any tradition connecting Mary's death and burial with the city of Ephesus. This Lutheran church is the only Protestant church in the Old City and one of the few Protestant congregations in the entire Holy Land. Built in the late 1800s, the church was dedicated to Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was one of the first Western rulers of modern times to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Located next to the Holy Sepulchre, Redeemer Church has the tallest bell tower in the Old City. After climbing the 177 steps to the top of the bell tower, visitors are rewarded with a spectacular view of the city, surrounded by its ancient walls. The Church of St. James is one of the most ornately decorated places of worship in the Armenian quarter of Jerusalem's Old City of the Holy Land. This church is now the cathedral of the Armenian Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. Armenia was the first nation to adopt Christianity as its state religion in AD 301. and the Armenian Christians established the first quarter in Jerusalem. This cathedral church is dedicated to two martyred saints with the same name, St. James the Great, who was one of the first apostles to follow Jesus, and St. James the Less, believed to be a close relative of Jesus, who became the first bishop of Jerusalem. In around AD 44, St. James was beheaded by Herod Agrippa I, the grandson of Herod the Great. 20 years later, St. James the Less was martyred by the temple authorities by throwing him down from the temple platform and stoned to death. Most parts of the cathedral belong to the 12th century, with the remains of two chapels built in the 5th century. Mount Tabor stands about 420 meters above the plain in Lower Galilee at the eastern end of the Jezreel Valley, 11 miles west of the Sea of Galilee and 9 kilometers east of Nazareth. The Gospel accounts of the Transfiguration, a momentous event in which Peter, James, and John were introduced to the divine incarnation of Christ the God-man, that took place on a high mountain in Galilee. Christian tradition in the early centuries named the mountain as Tabor. According to all traditions, Tabor is the holy mountain, and it is also called the Mount of Transfiguration. This location is cited in early apocryphal writings and was accepted by the Syriac and Byzantine churches. Hence, a succession of churches and a monastery were built on Mount Tabor from the 4th century. When the Crusaders were defeated, all of the religious buildings were destroyed in 1263. Mount Tabor was deserted for nearly 400 years until 1631, when Fakir al-Din granted the Franciscans permission to settle there. Subsequently, the permission was confirmed by the Ottoman government in the 17th and the 18th centuries. A small church was built in 1873, followed by the present church built by the Franciscans in 1924. The prominent Catholic and Greek Orthodox buildings were constructed in the late 19th and 20th centuries. At the entrance of the church are chapels dedicated to Moses and Elijah, who was seen with Jesus during his transfiguration. The event itself is depicted above the main altar. As I live, saith the King, whose name is the Lord of hosts, surely as Tabor is among the mountains, and as Carmel by the sea, so shall he come. Tabor and Hermon shall rejoice in thy name. In the time of the judges, the prophetess Deborah and her general Barak marshaled their warriors to rout the 900 chariots of Sisera and his Canaanite army. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. The valley of Jezreel is named as the scene of the Battle of Armageddon, which is also called Harmageddon, in which good will triumph over evil. Mount Tabor overlooks the fertile plain of the Jezreel Valley, which is the breadbasket of Israel. This plain has often witnessed the clashes of battles. And I saw the beast, and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse, and against his army. The original church on the Mount of Olives, the Church of Eleona in Greek, was among the 3 early churches whose construction was initiated during the early 4th century by St. Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great. The church was built over the cave where Jesus Christ often met and taught his disciples during their visits to the Mount of Olives, especially the Lord's Prayer. More interestingly, the Lord's Prayer is rendered on tiles in almost every language known in the world. The church, along with most Christian places in Jerusalem, was destroyed by the Persians when they swept through Palestine in 614. Although the basilica was rebuilt in later years, it was finally destroyed in 1009 by Caliph al-Hakim, the Fatimid ruler of Egypt. During the Crusades in the 12th century, a chapel called Pater Noster was built by the Crusaders on the site of the Eleona Church. This chapel later passed into disuse with the departure of the Crusaders, and possibly was destroyed in 1187 by Saladin's armies. In 1874, a convent of Carmelite nuns from France was established on the site of the Pater Noster Chapel. In 1910, the foundations of the original Eleonora Basilica were discovered by the French, who, in the 1920s, began construction of a new basilica near the old foundations, based upon the model of the Constantine Church. The Gospel of Luke tells us, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, which killest the prophets and stonest them that are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, as a hen doth gather her brood under her wings, and ye would not." This panoramic view is similar to what Jesus would have seen from the Mount of Olives when he entered Jerusalem for the last time, only a few days before his death. Built in 1954 in the shape of a teardrop, the church commemorates Jesus weeping over Jerusalem during the closing days of his earthly ministry. He knew the city would be destroyed in the years to come, and this happened in AD 70, about 35 years after his crucifixion and resurrection, when the Roman army sacked and burned the city. The teardrop-shaped building is more than a memorial to bitter tears and the anguish of death. It reminds us of a Savior who was both fully human and fully divine. His tears for Jerusalem were real, but so was the divine power that brought him out of the grave. He bled real blood like any man, but his blood atoned for our sins and gave us eternal life in his kingdom. The room where the Last Supper is reputed to have taken place is known as the Sinoculum, a Latin word meaning dinner. This site is on the second floor of a building that also contains the tomb of King David, which is on the ground level. A small shrine adjacent to the upper room is known as the Chapel of the Holy Spirit. An ancient Christian tradition claims that this room marks the place where the Holy Spirit descended upon early believers on the day of the Pentecost. Here, Jesus and his disciples ate the Last Supper together on the night before he was arrested.
This is the bread of life.
Jesus often retreated to these cultivated groves to pass the night and pray. And on that Thursday evening after the Last Supper and before his arrest, he retired here with his disciples. As the Synoptic Gospels recount, In this place, Jesus experienced his deepest anguish, deciding to entrust himself to the will of the Father. That same night, Jesus was betrayed when the Sanhedrin arrested him. His disciples fell asleep without uttering a single word of encouragement, but God sent an angel from heaven to strengthen him. He conquered the temptation and fear with the words that make Gethsemane one of the most sacred spots on earth.
If it is possible.
He went away again the second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. In the front is a flat rock, said to be the holy rock of agony, on which Jesus knelt to pray. The popular name for this structure recognizes the contributions that came from several countries of the world to enable the Catholic order known as the Franciscans to build the Church of All Nations in 1924. It is also known as the Church of the Agony or the Basilica of the Agony. This name commemorates Jesus' agonizing prayer in the nearby Garden of Gethsemane. Above the painting of Jesus on the front of the church are two Greek letters, Alpha and Omega. These two letters symbolize Jesus as the Lord of all creations, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Inside of the church, a painting at the altar shows Jesus in prayer, surrounded by ancient olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane. The ceiling of the church is painted a deep sky blue to simulate the night sky beneath which Jesus prayed. While the modern Church of All Nations is less than 100 years old, it rests on the foundations of two earlier churches, one built in the 1100s, preceding by another dating back to the 4th century. To visit Gethsemane is to reflect on the suffering that Jesus endured on mankind's behalf. As the name implies, St. Peter in Gallicantu claims to occupy the site where Peter denied Jesus on the night he was arrested. This church, which was built in 1931, is the successor to another church of the same name that stood on the same site in the 12th century. That church in turn was the successor of another church on the same site that was built in AD 475. Hence, St. Peter's Church has occupied the same site for more than 1,500 years. It is truly incredible to find a church with an unbroken succession in Jerusalem. All of the four Gospels record Peter's infamous denial. The scene of Peter's disgrace was the courtyard of the high priest Caiaphas. In the courtyard, a statue depicts the denial, including the rooster, the woman who questioned Peter, and a Roman soldier.
I know you. You were with them.
No, this Jesus they speak of, nor have I ever heard of him.
The lower levels of the Church of St. Peter in Gallicantu contain what are believed to have been a guardroom and a prisoner's cell, both hewn out of bedrock. The guardroom contains wall fixtures to attach a prisoner's chains. Holes in the stone pillars would have been used to fasten a prisoner's hands and feet when he was flogged. The prisoner's cell offers a sobering insight into where Christ might have spent the night before he was crucified. This prisoner's cell has become known as Christ's prison. Under the church is a dungeon, thought to be the cell where Jesus was detained for the night following his arrest. The Assumptionist congregation that built St. Peter in Gallicantu over the ruins of a Byzantine basilica believes it stands on the site of the high priest's house, built on 4 different levels: the upper church, a middle church, a guard room, and a dungeon. The ceiling inside the church, which is striking, is dominated by a huge cross-shaped window designed in a radiant variety of colors. Facing the entrance is a bound Jesus being questioned in the house of Caiaphas. On the right, Jesus and the disciples are shown at the Last Supper. On the left, Peter is depicted in ancient papal dress as the first pope. These stone steps were certainly in use at the time of Jesus. On the evening of his arrest, he probably descended them with his disciples on their way from the Last Supper to Gethsemane. And even if the house of Caiaphas was situated farther up Mount Zion than the present church, Christ would have been brought under guard via this route to the high priest's house. In Aramaic, the language most Jews spoke in the early 1st century, Hegel Dhamma means field of blood. The Greek Orthodox monastery of St. Onofrius, built in 1874 over the remains of an earlier church building, is occupied by a small community of Greek Orthodox nuns. This monastery of St. Onofrius now stands on the place where Judas is believed to have hanged himself. Some scholars believe this is the Potter's Field, which the authorities purchased with the blood money Judas returned after he was filled with remorse for betraying Jesus. The monastery chapel is in a former burial cave with holes in the walls where bodies were laid. The 16th century tradition says 8 of the apostles hid here after Jesus was arrested at Gethsemane. Station 1. Jesus is condemned to death by Pontius Pilate. This event is held at a site which is now a school, Madrasa al-Omariya, nearly 300 meters west from the Lion's Gate that was earlier known as Stephen's Gate. Station 2. Jesus is given the cross to carry to the site of crucifixion. This station is marked as the Church of the Condemnation. Also on this site is the Church of the Flagellation that commemorates the Roman soldiers' flogging of Jesus. Here, the soldiers placed a mock crown of thorns on his head and dressed him in a purple robe to ridicule at his claim to be a king. The Via Dolorosa pilgrimage has been followed since early Christianity, beginning as soon as it became safe to do so, after Constantine legalized the religion during the middle of the 4th century. Following the exact path that Jesus walked is impossible. To do so would require digging up the streets of the old city and excavating several feet down to the street level that existed in his time, almost 2,000 years ago. Therefore, the visitor wishing to walk the Via Dolorosa will have to settle for the route that has been mapped out by many centuries of Christian tradition. Station 3. Jesus fell down under the weight of the cross for the first time. The 3rd station is identified by a stone tablet that shows Jesus falling under the weight of the cross. Another marker at this station is a small Polish Catholic chapel with a painting showing his stumbling under the cross. Station 4. This station is marked as the place where Mother Mary watched her son go by with the cross and is commemorated at the Armenian Church of Our Lady of the Spasm. Station 5. Simon of Cyrene helps Jesus carry his cross. A small church, which was dedicated to Simon the Cyrene, stands at the station. Established in 1229, it belongs to the Franciscans, the Catholic caretakers of numerous sites in the Holy Land. In the church wall is a small cavity that is said to be an imprint made by the hand of Jesus. Station 6. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. According to an early Christian legend, one of the women following Jesus while he was carrying the cross was Veronica, who wiped Jesus' bleeding face with a silk veil. Miraculously, the image of his face was permanently imprinted on this cloth, and so the legend goes, it is preserved today in the Basilica of St. Peter in Rome. A small Greek Catholic chapel located at this station is appropriately named Chapel of the Holy Face. Station 7. Jesus falls the second time. Under the altar in a small Catholic chapel marking this site is a wall painting portraying Jesus' second fall. Station 8. Jesus speaks to the women of Jerusalem. Among the Gospels, only Luke records the words of Jesus commemorated at this station. Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. His message was about the impending destruction of Jerusalem, which occurred in AD 70 when the Roman army invaded the city. A Greek Orthodox monastery marks this station. Station 9. Jesus falls the third time. This station, in the courtyard of the Holy Sepulchre, has several interesting landmarks, including the Ethiopian Church of St. Michael and the Coptic Church of St. Helen. Inside the Church of St. Helen is a large underground system that served at one time as a water source for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Early Christians venerated this site where Jesus Christ was crucified, buried, and resurrected from the dead. Visitors enter through the left side door, as the right door was blocked up by Muslim conquerors in the 12th century. Upon entering, visitors immediately turn to the right and ascend steep, curving stairs, which is literally climbing the hill of Calvary, in Latin, or Golgotha, in Aramaic, meaning the place of the skull. When visitors step to the floor, they are standing on top of the hill, Calvary or Golgotha, where Christ was crucified. To the right, inside the main door of the church, 19 steep and curving steps lead up to the chapels constructed above the rock of Calvary. The 5 stations inside the church are not specifically marked. After ascending the steps, immediately on the right is the 10th station. Jesus is stripped. Station 11. Jesus is nailed to the cross. Station 12. Jesus dies on the cross. The much more ornate Greek Orthodox Chapel of the Crucifixion in the left nave of Calvary is the 12th station. The silver disc beneath the altar marks the place where it is believed the cross of Christ stood. The limestone rock of Calvary may be touched through a round hole in the disc. The first church was built in AD 326 by the Emperor Constantine I. He razed Hadrian's pagan temple and had Christ's tomb cut away from the original hillside. His mother, St. Helena, found the cross of Christ in a cistern not far from the hill of Calvary. Constantine's church was later burned and destroyed by the Persians in 614. The church was restored, but again destroyed by the Muslims in 1009. The Crusaders completed the reconstruction of the church in 1129, which is essentially the church that stands today. Station 13. Jesus is taken down from the cross. Between the Catholic and Greek chapels, a Catholic altar of Our Lady of Sorrows depicting Mary with a sword piercing her heart commemorates the 13th station. The body of Jesus was anointed before burial. Thousands of the pilgrims who visit daily reverently kiss this reddish stone slab, although it is not the stone on which Christ's body was anointed. This devotion is recorded only since the 12th century. The present stone dates back from 1810. On the wall behind the stone is a Greek mosaic depicting Christ's being taken down from the cross, his body being prepared for burial, and his body being taken to the tomb for burial. Station 14. Jesus is laid in the tomb inside the edicule of the tomb on the main floor. And when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre and departed. The edicule, the tomb of Jesus, is comprised of 2 chambers. The first chamber, known as the Chapel of the Angel, holds the angel's stone that is a fragment of the stone believed to have sealed the tomb of Jesus after Jesus' burial. And the second chamber is Christ's tomb. Inside the tomb on the right, a marble slab covers the rock bench on which the body of Jesus was placed. The slab was deliberately split by order of the Franciscan guardians of the Holy Land in 1555, lest the Ottoman Turks should steal such a fine piece of marble. In the case of Jesus, the edicule is believed to be of the arcosolium type with a burial bench or shelf parallel to the wall. The Latin word arcosolium is defined as an arched recess used as a place of entombment. Arcus means arch, and solium means throne. Literally, the word arcosolium means place of state. Early arcosolia were carved out of the living rock in catacombs. In 1808, because of a devastating fire, the present edicule was built in 1810 by the Greek Orthodox community. Ownership of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is jointly shared among the Greek Orthodox, the Catholics, known as Latins, and the Armenian Orthodox. The Greeks, who call the basilica Anastasis, or the Church of the Resurrection, owns its central worship space known as the Catholicon. The Armenians own the underground chapel of St. Helena, which they have renamed in honor of St. Gregory the Illuminator. The Catholics own the Franciscan chapel of the Apparition and the deep underground chapel of the Finding of the Cross. Nevertheless, different views exist about the exact places where the crucifixion, the burial, and the associated events took place. However, fortunately, the leaders of all the three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, unanimously agree about the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Hence, as William Thompson writes, there is no need to search for a site that the providence of God has rendered impossible to discover. It is far better to rest contented with the fact that somewhere near the walls of this very limited platform of the holy city, the Son of Man was lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Men must believe in him, not his sepulchre. We must not look to Golgotha for salvation, but to the precious blood of the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. By means of touch and sharing of a meal, the risen Christ established direct contact with his disciples. He invites them in this way to recognize that he is not a ghost, and above all, to verify that the risen body in which he appears to them is the same body that had been tortured and crucified, for it still bears the traces of his passion. Yet at the same time, this authentic, real body possesses the new properties of a glorious body, not limited by space and time, but be able to be present how and when he wills. For Christ's humanity can no longer be confined to earth, and belongs henceforth to the Father's divine realm. Jesus broke bread in the house of Cleophas, an action by which he dedicated the house of Cleophas as a church. He also received the Holy Spirit and the grace of doing miracles and speaking in different tongues. Cleophas was the first to share a meal with the Lord after his resurrection, eating and drinking with him. He preached throughout the country and converted many people to Christ. Cleophas, one of 70 disciples of Jesus, later died as a martyr. During the Byzantine period, AD 324 to 637, a large church complex was gradually built over the house of Cleophas, venerated by Christians as the place of the breaking of bread by the risen Christ. This church complex consisted of 2 basilicas and a baptistry. The sanctuary was destroyed by the Persian invasion and again by the Arab invasion in the 7th century AD. Although the Crusaders rebuilt the basilica, it did not survive. Eventually, the Christian presence faded away. In 1878, only at the initiative of St. Mariam of Bethlehem did a Carmelite convent acquire the site. Since then, it has once more become a place of pilgrimage. According to tradition, this sacred octagonal chapel on the Mount of Olives is the site where Jesus ascended into heaven 40 days after his resurrection. During the Ottoman period, a mosque was built on the south side of the Crusader structure, and its tower was built on the north side of the entrance to the chapel. The octagonal-shaped dome, built in the center of an enclosed yard, was built over earlier Byzantine and Crusader period structures. The entrance to the chapel is located on the western side of the structure. A view of the chapel ceiling is seen from below inside. The original structure is Crusader-built over ruins of a Byzantine memorial chapel. In the center of the floor inside the dome is a stone with a cavity. According to tradition, the cavity contains an imprint of the foot of Jesus when he made his ascent into heaven. The original Crusader cape was open, however, the cover was added in a later period. A hot air balloon flight offers an extraordinary experience. Amazing panoramic views of the land of Israel include stunning views of Jezreel Valley, 1 hour and 15 minutes away from Tel Aviv, between Mount Tabor and Mount Gilboa, where Israel's history comes back to life. The Judean desert, Bar Saba Monastery, St. George Monastery, and other monasteries have survived for centuries. Mount Gerizim and Ebal, Herodium, and much more. Despite successive attempts by the Seleucid king Antigonus, the Roman Emperor Pompey, and Herod the Great to bring Petra under the control of their respective empires, Petra remained largely in Nabatean hands until around AD 100 when the Romans took over. It was still inhabited during the Byzantine period when the former Roman Empire moved its focus east to Constantinople, but the area would decline in importance thereafter. The Crusaders constructed a fort there in the 12th century, but soon withdrew, leaving Petra to the local people until the early 19th century, when it was rediscovered by the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt in 1812. Entrance to the city is through the Sieg, a narrow gorge over 1 kilometer in length, which is flanked on either side by soaring 80-meter-high cliffs. Simply walking through the Sieg is an experience in itself. The colors and formations of the rocks are dazzling. Petra is Jordan's most valuable treasure and greatest tourist attraction. This vast, unique city was carved into the sheer rock face by the Nabateans, an industrious, nomadic Arab people who settled in this area more than 2,000 years ago and laid the foundations of a commercial empire that extended into Syria. This productive population turned the region into an important junction for the silk, spice, and other trade routes that linked China, India, and southern Arabia with Egypt, Syria, Greece, and Rome. At the end of the Sieg is an awe-inspiring experience, viewing the Al-Khazni, the treasury, with its massive facade, 30 meters wide and 43 meters high, carved out of the sheer dusty pink rock face and dwarfing everything around it. Carved in the early 1st century as the tomb of an important Nabatean king, the edifice represents the engineering genius of these ancient people.